I am Robert. I am 27 years of age. This tranquil suburb has been my home for as long as I can recall. It's a quaint little spot, tranquil, and I suppose you could say my existence is quite ordinary. I am employed at a corporate office, fulfilling a conventional role within the finance department. The compensation is reasonable, it covers my expenses, and that's really all I can hope for. It lacks a certain thrill, doesn't it? The daily routine remains unchanged. Review messages, attend lengthy discussions, navigate through data sheets, and do it all over again. It's not that I have a strong aversion to it, but I definitely don't have a deep affection for it either. The work doesn't bring me genuine fulfillment, yet it provides a decent income that ensures my comfort and allows me to support my family when necessary. I've been contemplating a departure from this job for some time now. I recognize that I might explore other paths, ones that could bring me greater joy, yet the apprehension of venturing into uncharted territory lingers. Let's be honest, the security this position provides is difficult to leave behind. In the workplace, there are a few individuals I engage with. Nothing overly profound, just light chats now and then. My boss, Charles, now that's a tale worth telling. Charles is the type of person who avoids superficial conversations. He's always focused and serious. He leads the department with a firm hand, ensuring that everything is under control. There's a certain aura about him that makes everyone, myself included, feel a bit daunted. He consistently stays ahead of the game, ensuring that everything operates seamlessly, and that level of meticulousness casts a certain shadow in the workspace. To be honest, I make an effort to keep my distance from him. I fulfill my responsibilities, maintain a low profile, and return home. It's straightforward and maintains simplicity. I've mastered the art of functioning under pressure, honing my ability to blend into the background whenever Charles is nearby. It suits my needs perfectly. The more he overlooks my presence, the more advantageous it is. However, we must consider his wife, Alice. I had noticed her in the office on several occasions, always exuding elegance and a polished appearance. She attended a few meetings with Charles, but apart from that, she wasn't someone I had ever truly noticed. I understood that Charles maintained a professional demeanor at work, so the thought of him being with her didn't appear overly complex. They were a dynamic duo, the sort of pair that everyone believed had everything perfectly in place. Yet, a lingering curiosity always occupied my thoughts about what their lives were like beyond the confines of the office. Was it truly possible for them to have everything managed, or was there something deeper unfolding in the shadows? That was the moment I received the assignment. It was an ordinary Wednesday afternoon when my manager requested that I deliver something to Charles's house. He instructed to take Alice her keys. She abandoned them in the office. Quite straightforward. Just a simple task, nothing unusual. Initially, I didn't give it much thought. I snatched the keys, tucked them into my pocket, and jumped into my car. As I made my way to their place, it felt as though I was merely going through the motions. It was a swift drop-off. I would exchange a brief greeting with Alice and then continue on my path. However, it became clear that my expectations were completely misguided regarding how this would develop. Upon reaching their residence, I pressed the doorbell. Alice responded, exuding her usual elegance. She smiled at me, yet her expression held an intriguing nuance. Perhaps it was the way she wasn't merely hurrying to return the keys. "You've traveled all this way for these," she remarked, a playful laugh escaping her lips. "Would you care to linger for a cup of coffee?" I found myself at a loss for words. It seemed like a laid-back offer, yet I wasn't accustomed to being asked to share moments with her. Nevertheless, I thought, why not give it a try? It would be just a brief coffee, nothing beyond that. As I crossed the threshold, we settled into her living room, and she promptly launched into the familiar topics. The weather, the events of her day, the busyness of Charles. However, the dialogue soon took a different turn. She began to express her feelings of loneliness, sharing how Charles seemed perpetually consumed by his work, so intent on everything else that their time together had dwindled to almost nothing. It felt strange. Alice exuded elegance, her confidence radiating as she maintained her composure in the office. Yet here, she was speaking to me as if I were someone she could trust with her secrets. It was peculiar, yet there was an undeniable allure in her voice, a captivating openness that drew me in. Initially, I was unsure of how to reply. I was merely there to deliver the keys, after all. Yet she was incredibly genuine, so authentic. To be honest, it left me feeling uneasy. What did she anticipate from me? Before I had the chance to fully grasp the situation, Alice posed a question that caught me off guard. Have you ever sensed that you're trapped in a life that doesn't truly belong to you? As if you're merely following a routine? Her words struck me with a force I hadn't anticipated. I found myself unprepared, yet she continued without pause. At times, I feel as though I've lost my way, she murmured, her tone soft. Charles is so absorbed in his craft that I feel like I've lost my own identity. And that was the moment of my revelation. Alice had something more in mind than just a coffee. She sought a person who would truly hear her, who would engage with her words on a deeper level. I found myself caught off guard, yet I couldn't ignore the warmth that surged within me at being the one she sought out. I remained still, caught in a moment of disbelief. Her words hung in the atmosphere, leaving me uncertain about how to reply. Alice's openness surprised me, and I had to push aside the unease that began to settle in. What do you do when the spouse of your superior, someone you've hardly interacted with, begins to share personal thoughts with you in this manner? For a moment, I thought about rising from my seat, offering my apologies, and making my way out the door. Choosing that path would have been the prudent option, the expected choice. Yet, an unseen force anchored me in that place. Perhaps it was the unmistakable sorrow that resonated in her voice. Perhaps it was the way she gazed at me, not merely as a coworker, but as an individual, as someone worthy of her trust. I inhaled deeply and made the choice to remain. Sure, I replied, attempting to keep it relaxed. I understand your perspective. At times, it seems as though I'm merely following a routine, you know? Rise, head to the office, return home, repeat the cycle. It seems as though I'm merely existing, rather than truly living. Her smile was gentle, as if my words had struck a chord within her. We lingered in that quiet space, each of us cradling our coffee, savoring the stillness around us. I found myself uncertain about the direction of this dialogue, yet it was clear she required someone to listen to her. It had evolved beyond mere casual conversation. It was palpable, a genuine moment of connection. Alice continued to express her thoughts on the growing distance in her relationship with Charles. She spoke of his relentless dedication to his craft, noting how their connection had settled into a familiar rhythm of quietude. Her voice held no anger, only a subdued feeling of loss. It seemed as though she had surrendered to the inevitable, extending her hand to someone who, at the very least, remained untouched by that realm. I found myself feeling a twinge of sympathy for her. Her words about Charles revealed a deep longing, as if she were an outsider, barred from the life they once shared. And now, there she stood, sharing all of this with me. Out of everyone. It seems like one of those moments when you come to understand that you're precisely where you need to be, exactly when you need to be there. In that instant, I found myself at a loss for how to navigate the situation. I felt a distance that prevented me from giving genuine guidance, yet her suffering was impossible to overlook. I took the step that seemed most instinctive to me. I paid attention. The dialogue took a turn, and Alice began to share her fervent interests. A spark ignited in her eyes, and I witnessed her begin to awaken once more. She shared that she once adored painting, yet she hadn't touched a brush in years. She possessed a multitude of passions, yet as time passed, they gradually faded from her grasp. I nodded, striving to match her pace. Yet, I sensed there was something deeper beneath the surface. There lay deeper truths hidden within her silence. It became evident that her conversation with me was not merely an outlet for her frustrations. She was on a quest for something elusive. Perhaps a getaway. Perhaps a means to rediscover her essence. Just when I was ready to share my thoughts, she abruptly shifted the topic. "So, Robert, share a bit about yourself," she inquired, her tone now more cheerful. "You expressed a sense of being trapped. What is it that you truly desire?" I let out an awkward chuckle. "I'm uncertain. It seems, as you pointed out, that slipping into a routine is quite effortless. Yet, I believe I've always yearned for something beyond this, something more than merely a job. Beyond mere existence." In that instant, we both recognized a shared connection between us. A yearning for something greater. A yearning for something more profound than the routine of our everyday existence. For a moment, it felt like we were on the verge of a deeper understanding. However, I swiftly brought to mind the limits that were set. I was present in the capacity of an employee. She was the spouse of Charles. I had to keep in mind the boundary that existed. Yet Alice had more to say. She leaned in slightly, as if she were gauging the atmosphere. "What if," she murmured, her voice dropping slightly now. "What if there were greater possibilities awaiting us? Something that transcended the mundane, free from the weight of expectations." I found myself uncertain about the direction this was taking. My heart began to quicken as she gazed at me with those gentle eyes, seeking something elusive that I couldn't quite identify. The atmosphere was thick with anticipation, leaving me uncertain about how to react in that fleeting instant. Just as I was about to say something, Alice's phone interrupted with a ring. She cast a fleeting look at it, let out a soft sigh, and then reached for it. "It's Charles," she remarked. "I ought to consider taking this." I nodded, a sense of relief washing over me as the tension dissipated. She rose to take the call, leaving me seated, enveloped in a swirl of bewilderment and an elusive emotion that I struggled to grasp. While she conversed with Charles, a wave of guilt washed over me. I wasn't doing anything wrong, yet it seemed like I was teetering on the edge of something inappropriate. And still, I remained there. The more time I spent there, the more intricate it appeared to become. After she ended the call, Alice offered an apology, appearing somewhat flustered. "Apologies for that," she remarked, her smile now slightly strained. "Charles consistently reaches out to see how things are going." Unsure of how to respond, I simply rose and took hold of my coat. "I suppose it's time for me to head out," I remarked, aiming to maintain a cheerful atmosphere. Just as I was about to walk away, Alice called out to me. "Robert," she murmured gently. "I appreciate your presence." I found myself in need of a listening ear. Her words took me by surprise, and I simply nodded, feeling a bit uncertain about how to reply. As I crossed the threshold, I sensed a change in the air. Returning to the past was no longer an option. A shift had occurred between us, and I couldn't dismiss the sense that this was merely the start. The days following that discussion with Alice felt like a haze. I attempted to avoid excessive contemplation, yet it proved challenging to do so. The manner in which she had confided in me, the openness she displayed, seemed to carry a significance beyond merely sharing a cup of coffee. I found myself revisiting that moment in my mind, the way she gazed at me when she expressed her gratitude, as if I had truly made a difference in her life. Yet, I was acutely aware of the limits. I had a task at hand, and she was wed to my superior. She was simply an individual seeking a listening ear, and I found myself in a moment that felt misaligned, or perhaps perfectly aligned. It was of no consequence. I was simply aiming to progress and maintain a professional demeanor. At last, the morning of the meeting with Charles arrived. I arrived early, as I often do, aiming to get a head start on the day. As I settled into my workspace, enveloped by the familiar soft murmur of the office, my gaze fell upon a small envelope resting on my desk. This memo stood out among the usual notes left for me. It had an air of distinction. The script flowed gracefully, carrying a touch of intimacy that set it apart from the usual office correspondence. I flipped it over, my heart racing as I recognized the sender, Alice. I found myself at a loss for thoughts. I had my expectations, but this was definitely not what I had in mind. For a brief moment, I paused, caught in a peculiar blend of intrigue and remorse. I carefully opened the envelope and gently unfolded the small piece of paper within. The language was straightforward, yet it stirred a sense of discomfort within me. Let's connect this evening at 7 p.m. Here is the address provided below. An address was inscribed in the corner of the note. It was just a short distance from the office, in a tranquil neighborhood that I was quite familiar with. Yet, the weight of the note, shrouded in secrecy, sent my heart into a frantic rhythm. What thoughts occupied Alice's mind? What was she seeking from me? The gravity of the situation bore heavily upon me. I had to acknowledge that my initial reaction was to overlook the note, to act as if it had never occurred. Yet, a certain curiosity within me, a compelling desire to grasp the unfolding situation, prevented me from turning my back and leaving. As the hours stretched endlessly, my mind lingered on it. I attempted to concentrate on my tasks, yet Alice's words and the emotions she had instilled in me overwhelmed my mind. I hoped that perhaps I was reading too much into it, that this was merely a straightforward invitation, possibly a means for her to show appreciation for our discussion. Yet, beneath the surface, I understood it was far more complex. As the clock struck 6:30 p.m., I stood before my bathroom mirror, meticulously adjusting my tie. The choice I had settled on to leave seemed almost instinctive by now, yet my thoughts were in a whirlwind. What if this was an error? What would happen if Charles discovered the truth? The outcomes may prove to be catastrophic. Yet, I couldn't resist the allure I experienced, drawn to Alice, captivated by the enigma surrounding it all. I snatched my coat and stepped outside, attempting to dismiss the anxious flutter in my stomach. The journey to the location was brief, and upon my arrival, I chose to park a short distance down the street, aiming to avoid any unnecessary attention. I approached the front door of the house, a quaint two-story structure adorned with a meticulously maintained garden. A peculiar sense of familiarity washed over me, as if every detail of this moment was orchestrating an encounter I was not ready to face. I pressed the doorbell and stood there, my heart pounding in my chest. In an instant, the door swung open, revealing Alice on the other side. She donned a modest dress, unadorned and straightforward, yet she radiated beauty in it. Our gazes locked, and for a fleeting moment, she appeared taken aback by my presence. Yet, that recognizable smile slowly appeared on her face. "Robert, I'm so pleased you could make it," she said, her voice gentle, tinged with uncertainty. I found myself torn. One part of me was hesitant to delve deeper, yet another part was undeniably curious about the unfolding mystery. Uncertainty filled my words, and I spoke with a tremor in my voice. "Yet, here I stand." She gracefully moved aside to allow me entry, and I trailed behind her into the living room. The dwelling exuded warmth and comfort, with flickering candles casting a gentle glow on the coffee table. It was more personal than I had expected, and in that moment, I found myself longing to turn around and walk away. However, that opportunity had passed. "I needed to see you," Alice said, once we were both settled on the couch. I felt lost and unsure of where to seek help. The air was thick with unspoken words, and a weight settled heavily in my chest. Her expression hinted at something deeper, and I sensed that her words would carry more weight than a mere "thank you for my attentive ear the other day." "Sometimes, the loneliness can be overwhelming," she continued, her voice barely above a whisper. "There's an inexplicable sense of being perpetually on the periphery, observing rather than participating, and it lingers within me. I simply wish to converse with someone outside of all this." With a wave of her hand, she indicated the surroundings, and I grasped her meaning instantly. Her union, her existence alongside Charles, it felt overwhelming for her. In that instant, I understood that what began as a casual chat over coffee had transformed into something far more intricate. Alice wasn't merely looking for companionship, she was yearning for something deeper. There was a lingering uncertainty about what I could provide. The stillness enveloped us, and I found myself inching nearer to her, uncertain of what lay ahead. The air was heavy with her words, laden with layers of unexpressed significance. Alice wasn't merely discussing loneliness, she was delving into a form of emotional isolation that eluded my complete understanding. As she sat opposite me, her gaze fixed on mine with a fervor that sent a chill racing down my spine. I found myself grasping the implications of her subtle cues. She moved a bit, her fingers anxiously gliding along the edge of her wine glass. I don't expect you to fix everything, she said gently, shattering the stillness. Yet, I found myself yearning for a listener. Hear me out, Robert. Her voice carried a sense of urgency, the fragility so palpable it stirred a sense of unease within me. She simply sought nothing beyond that. Or at least, that's the narrative I crafted for myself. Yet, I sensed that this moment held a significance beyond mere conversation. I'm present, I murmured softly, uncertain of what further words to offer. I found myself uncertain of her expectations, yet I had no intention of dismissing her. We had ventured into uncharted lands. She inhaled deeply, her gaze fixed on me. She went on, expressing how often she had felt unseen. Charles is perpetually occupied with his professional commitments. He seems to exist in a different realm entirely. It seems he has become oblivious to it all. She averted her gaze, battling the feelings she was reluctant to reveal. I squirmed in my seat. I was familiar with the tales. All did. Charles thrived in the business world, yet it often felt as though his devotion to his work overshadowed his commitment to her. Unbeknownst to me were the depths of their relationship struggles, yet it was evident that Alice experienced a profound sense of abandonment. And even though the moral boundaries that ought to have held me back were clear, I found myself inexplicably drawn to her plight. I understand, I replied, maintaining a calm tone. I found myself uncertain about how to reply. I hesitated to foster this, yet it proved difficult to detach myself. There she stood before me, exposed and defenseless, and for reasons beyond my understanding, an urge to assist her welled up within me. She nodded slowly, her eyes falling to her lap. I've been reflecting on this quite a bit, Robert. Concerning all matters. Concerning you. My heart raced at the way she expressed that. The implication was unmistakable. Her gaze had shifted, no longer viewing me merely as a coworker or a sounding board for her frustrations, but as someone who intrigued her, and that epiphany struck me with overwhelming force. I don't want to make things complicated, she added quickly, yet the hesitation in her voice hinted that she was aware it was already too late for that. Yet, there are moments when I ponder whether I'm merely seeking an escape from it all. Perhaps a diversion. I took a deep breath, attempting to steady the tightening sensation in my gut. Initially, I felt compelled to express that I wasn't that individual, that I had no desire to be involved in whatever this situation entailed. Yet, the words eluded me. She possessed an undeniable allure. Her demeanor, her words, her longing for companionship. I could perceive it in her gaze. She was not seeking counsel or compassion. She sought something deeper, something intimate, and I could sense the weight of that plea pressing down on me. Text, I don't want to be a part of your problems, I said, my voice barely above a whisper, but I'm here to listen. I will always be here to hear you out. She offered a slight smile, an expression tinged with both sorrow and gratitude. That's everything I require at this moment, Robert. Simply a person who values the art of listening. The direction of our conversation was uncertain, yet the undeniable intensity between us was palpable. Her words, the intensity of her gaze, the emotion she stirred within me, it was a perilous path, yet I found myself irresistibly pulled further into it. The distinctions between right and wrong, professional and personal were beginning to fade, and I found it impossible to overlook. I realize this may seem overwhelming, she murmured, her voice soft and hesitant, but there are moments when I long to feel valued by someone, to be seen as more than just the wife of the boss. In that instant, a revelation struck me. Alice sought more than mere ears to hear her. She sought a person who could reignite her sense of vitality. Someone who could awaken in her the realization that she was more than merely a neglected spouse. Despite my desire to maintain professionalism, the attraction between us was impossible to ignore. I adjusted my position, feeling my heart race. The image of her gaze from earlier lingered in my mind, refusing to fade away. Her vulnerability had transformed into something entirely different. Something far deeper, more personal. It had transcended mere solitude. It was about the bond we were forging, no matter how misguided it may have been. I'm uncertain about what you're expecting from me, Alice, I admitted, my voice revealing the doubt within me, yet I'm hesitant to complicate matters further. She smiled once more, that same subtle, bittersweet smile. You're not causing any additional problems, Robert. You're simply present. At this moment, that suffices. Yet, I sensed the palpable tension surrounding us, the unspoken words lingering in the space, and I understood that this moment would evolve beyond mere listening. We had already crossed a threshold, and retreat was no longer an option. The dilemma at hand was whether I would allow myself to be drawn deeper into the situation. As the night wore on, I felt an irresistible pull towards her, an inexplicable force drawing me in closer. The warmth enveloped us, a palpable tension in the air, as the moments stretched, thick with unspoken promise. Even with all the logical reasoning swirling in my mind urging me to retreat, I found myself captivated by the possibilities of what might unfold if I chose to stay the course. In that moment, uncertainty gripped me, leaving me hesitant about whether to retreat. I made every effort to maintain professionalism, convincing myself that this was merely a moment of weakness, a brief misstep in judgment. Yet, I realized at this moment that this was far more than a mere phase. This was undeniable, and no words or actions of mine could change the reality of what had transpired between Alice and me. The weeks following that conversation had unfolded in a haze of fleeting looks, hushed exchanges, and instances where the boundary between professional and something deeper had gradually blurred. Each encounter at the office carried an implicit connection, a palpable tension that neither of us could ignore. It began with simple, harmless text exchanges regarding work, inquiries about the children, the everyday routine. However, the tone of her messages shifted. They grew increasingly personal and intimate. She would inquire about my day, and I would share the pressures of my work, the relentless expectations of my role. She would lend an ear and then share that I was on her mind. And it wasn't merely friendly, there was a gravity to her words now, something deeper. I was aware that replying was a mistake. I was aware that I ought to have turned and left. However, I did not. I was unable to. One evening, Alice extended an invitation for me to come over to her house after work. It was common for us to discuss our work over drinks, yet this occasion had a distinct vibe. She was adamant, and despite my reservations, I acquiesced. As I stepped into her home, the ambience felt distinct from the typical rigid, corporate veneer I had grown accustomed to with her. The atmosphere exuded a cozy charm, creating a sense of closeness. We settled into her living room, and the atmosphere was thick with unspoken tension. She offered me a glass of wine, her gaze unwavering as it locked onto mine. It felt different from our typical exchanges. The casual conversation was absent. We found ourselves in this moment, surrounded by stillness, free from interruptions and justifications. You know, Alice said, her voice gentle yet resolute, I've been reflecting deeply on everything. Concerning you, concerning us. My heart raced within my chest, yet I remained silent. I was unable to. I feared that uttering a word would break the fragile illusion we had woven together. She inhaled deeply, the stillness enveloping us, and then, in a voice that barely rose above the ambient sound, she confessed, I can't stop thinking about you, Robert. There it stood, the unspoken truth we had both sidestepped. She had moved beyond merely searching for solace or someone to hear her out. She desired me, and I could no longer deceive myself. I desired her as well. My mind was a whirlwind, yet I felt compelled to rise and approach her. Before I realized it, I found myself directly in front of her, the distance between us diminishing with each step I took. The warmth radiated from her form, accompanied by the rapid cadence of her breathing. My thoughts were in turmoil, urging me to halt, yet my body was already turning against me. Is this really happening? I inquired, my voice a mere whisper, my heart constricted with eager expectation. I'm uncertain. Alice murmured, her fingertips softly brushing against my arm. However, I can no longer maintain the facade. Returning to the past is not an option for me. And just like that, the phrases I had been sidestepping were laid bare. There was no way to retreat at this point. I moved closer, and the kiss became unavoidable. Gentle at the outset, yet it grew richer, brimming with the myriad feelings we had both kept bottled up for an eternity. It was more than a mere kiss. It was the peak of all that had been developing between us. The solitude, the estrangement within our union, the shared longing for something greater. We were both in search of affirmation, a bond that transcended the ordinary, breaking through the barriers we had constructed around our hearts. As we finally separated, Alice gazed at me, her eyes reflecting a blend of relief and uncertainty. "I never imagined this would occur," she murmured softly. "Yet now that it has happened, I'm uncertain if I can bring myself to halt." I nodded, still breathless, attempting to grasp the whirlwind of events unfolding around me. "I'm not sure either, Alice," I confessed, "but I can't act like I don't share those feelings." The ensuing weeks unfolded in a tempest of hidden truths. Each fleeting moment we shared was laced with danger, yet we found ourselves unable to resist. The office, previously a realm of decorum, transformed into a battleground of silent looks and concealed caresses. Caution was essential. Charles lingered in the background, his gaze ever present. The mystery surrounding our connection was both thrilling and daunting, a secret that only we shared. Yet, beneath the surface, I understood that what we shared transcended mere infidelity or a transient experience. Alice and I discovered a connection that fulfilled a mutual longing within us. I had always envisioned myself as the person who avoided trouble, maintaining a safe distance from complications. Yet, I found myself woven into this clandestine realm, equally exhilarating and perilous. Ultimately, events started to unravel. The guilt weighed heavily upon me. Could I truly be the type of individual who would turn against a friend? Was I truly prepared to gamble everything for something that seemed capable of tearing me to shreds? And, perhaps most crucially, would Alice and I ever genuinely find our way back to the place we once occupied? Ultimately, I found myself unable to provide answers to those questions. All I understood was that I had ventured too far and there was no way to retreat. Alice and I were bound by this journey, regardless of where it led us. In that instant, the consequences were the furthest thing from my mind. The revelation had emerged, and it had irrevocably transformed us both.